Welcome to the University Park Alliance Urban Innovators Speaker Series. I want to thank our hosts, the GAR and Knight Foundations. This is their home here in Akron. It is a wonderful facility, and I want to thank them for welcoming us into this facility. It is truly a place where we can build community in University Park. We also want to recognize tonight our other sponsors. We have a number of them. First and foremost, the Greater Akron Chamber, but also Neotropolis, Western Reserve, Public Media, Green City Blue Lake Institute, and Torchbearers. They all helped us promote these and in some cases helped us to pay for what we're doing here tonight and to bring Chuck in. So we're very appreciative of all of our partners and our sponsors.
What they've asked me to do first is give a little bit of a hint as to a new marketing program for University Park and the University Park Alliance. The University Park neighborhood is fabulous. The vision is to make it even better. And part of making University Park a better community is sharing that story. The vision for University Park is to encourage revitalization, but retaining its unique urban identity. Do something great today. What a great line. In University Park, you can do something great today and every day. And something great in University Park can mean doing something you enjoy, taking advantage of an opportunity, or finding fulfillment, living your values. The next challenge was to develop symbols and imagery to help tell this unique story of University Park. This is University Park's new identity, and it will be an instantly recognizable and a universally embraced symbol of diversity, creativity, sustainability, and the vast array of people, arts, culture, and events found in the neighborhood. Congratulations. I'm very proud to introduce our speaker tonight. Chuck Bohl is Associate Professor and the Director of the Graduate Program in Real Estate Development and Urbanism at the University of Miami School of Architecture. Dr. Bohl is an expert on placemaking, community building, and mixed-use development, and lectures and consults widely on these subjects in the U.S. and abroad. Dr. Bohl holds a doctorate in city and regional planning from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to please welcome Chuck Bohl.
Okay, good evening. Can you hear me okay? Mic's working all right? I have a lot of wires on here. I'm wired. So I'm going to talk to you about placemaking and community building and this idea of third places, of community gathering places. And this is the caricature of third places. Cheers is kind of the example of the informal gathering place. This was an idea popularized by Ray Oldenburg, a sociologist. And another one you're very familiar with is Starbucks. Starbucks is really branded, essentially, what a third place is about, where people come and sometimes they're not even there for coffee. They're working, they're meeting people, they're hanging out, they're reading the paper, but they really have nurtured that relaxed, informal gathering place. We'll talk a little more about remembering these lessons to sustain our communities today. And when I talk about sustainability, I don't limit it to just a green perspective. For me, the broader definition really has to encompass community livability. And I know there's textbook definitions and so forth, but in order for a community to be truly sustainable, it has to be a place that people are willing to invest in over time, repeatedly, places that people feel a strong connection to, a devotion to, places where people want to live. And raise children and families and retire and all of those things. So it really has to have a basis in how attractive the place is just for everyday life and carrying out our everyday lives. So here's the Country Club Plaza in Kansas City, a truly sustainable place. It's been around since this plan was done in 1922. This was the fringe. This was out on the fringe of Kansas City at the time. J.C. Nichols, the developer, planned the community, the country club district, and the retail center, the place where all the shops and businesses would be, was the country club district. And this place has survived through decades of all different trends and fashions and fads in retail, but it has been sustainable. It is still there. in part because of the vision and the planning and the care that went into the creation of it. We can ask the same questions. Are you planning and developing and managing your community for what? Next week, next year, or the coming decades? And so what is your plan to create a place with staying power, to sustain your community, to evolve, and to compete? Part of it has to do with this idea of placemaking, creating great places. Now, we have a great history of what I'd call a culture of good placemaking in this country. And right from the founding of many of our communities, plans matter, and the lines on the map can have real meaning. And the vision that people bring to the creation and sustenance of communities can really shape the future and create places that can endure over time. This is one of my favorite quotes by Benton Mackay, who this is the founder of the Appalachian Trail, who lived in Shirley Center, Massachusetts. This is a 20th century person writing about the founding of Shirley Center. And it reflects, I think, how differently our community leaders and our act of placemaking differed then from now. Now we're much more specialized, and we go about doing studies and so forth. And I think that this simple statement really captures the perspective of people coming together with a conscious vision and idea for what their community would be. The committee made its report and recommendations to their town plan. The cornerstone would be the meeting house. On one side would be the churchyard, dedicated to eternity. On the other side, the common, dedicated to posterity. Around this would be clustered, besides the homesteads and the town hall, the meeting house, the schoolhouse, and the country store. These would make the 5 senses that constitute a complete community: home, government, religion, education, and commerce. And these relate to extremely important institutions, even more so for many of our communities today. As industries come and go, our institutions are extremely important to our communities today. And this more well-rounded view of what it was to plan and create a community is a stark contrast to today. So today, this is, of course, just a caricature, just a cartoon. It's not real places like this. Well, there's a few real places like this. There's actually quite a few real places like this. I could have shown you any number of photos to follow the cartoon. And the striking thing when you step back for a minute and look at a photo like this is that everything in one way or another is regulated in this landscape. I don't know if I want to say planned, but certainly not with planners in the room, but certainly down to the level of codes, traffic engineering standards, setbacks, signage, so forth. But obviously not planned consistent with any vision, with any community vision we might think people living there would have. And this is part of our dilemma, our contemporary dilemma, is that we have a very ad hoc landscape. Our metropolitan landscapes consist of pieces of what used to be coherent communities, those Shirley centers and those savannas that had all the pieces assembled. They had the places where people lived, and the workplaces, and the marketplaces, and the places for public gathering. And you could have more vital public gathering places because things were in closer proximity. Now we have very specialized places that are stitched together by a massive highway infrastructure. And so we start to look back and also look around and come to grips with part of what's missing. And this isn't the whole of what's missing, but this is my piece of it. This is the piece that I'll focus on this evening, which is placemaking. Mayor Riley of Charleston, South Carolina, summed it up when he got up one day and realized how important his role was as the mayor of a city in the shaping of it. And here he's quoted, "A decision about the physical design of a city will influence the city and its people for generations." And he actually called on Jack Robertson of Cooper Robertson architecture firm, famous architecture firm out of New York, and said, I'm the chief designer of my city, and I have no knowledge of this. Can you teach me? Can you help me understand the physical nature of the city? And that led to the creation of the Mayor's Institute, which is a fantastic program where mayors come and learn about community design. And part of what mayors like Joe Riley and others discovered is that they have all these regulations and departments and codes and so forth. And when they look to the best loved places in their communities and say, what's one of the best loved streets, a residential neighborhood, and this is in Charleston. And if he were to turn to his staff and ask, if the hurricane comes again, if Hugo comes and destroys this neighborhood, will our regulations and code allow us to rebuild a place like this? And the answer is no. Then he knows there's something deeply wrong with the system that has evolved over time. And part of the problem is that has been really the suburbanization of the city. As industry and buildings and shops and things come and go in the city, buildings get older, sometimes they're cleared away. And then when development comes, it tends to come in the form that we become accustomed to developing not in the city. So here is really essentially a suburban office building, what you might find in an office campus in the heart of downtown Spartanburg. It's the wrong type of building interacting in the wrong way with the street. And here we have the example in Charleston where we have maybe we would say a better arrangement of buildings interacting with the street, creating a different kind of place. One's suburban, one's urban. And it's not that one's good or one's bad, it's that one belongs in a suburban context, helping create a wonderful suburban community, and others belong in an urban context. And part of what we learn in studying the places that have survived over time and enduring places is that we can do this again. So we can study the language and the design. We can actually measure places and streets and buildings that we admire, and the great places, the great loved places of our communities, and we can apply those lessons, and we can make new places. Placemaking is about literally creating places, and I'll walk you through a whole series of ideas on that subject. But this basic idea that there are suburban things and there are urban things, and we can sort them out, is kind of a starting place. If we're creating an urban community, we're creating an urban place, then this is our Saks Fifth Avenue. We want that one. If we're out on the fringe and we're part of the mall, then that one will work just fine, but don't bring this into the city. Another crude aspect of this is literally scale. So we've, a lot of our planning and design standards, and certainly our engineering standards, have evolved around the scale of the car. And so here you have 20 cars arranged in a parking lot. And those require about 6,000 square feet. 20 people, on the other hand, comfortably standing, require about 120 feet. That has major implications for the design of communities. If your focus is 90% on the accommodation of the car, then you're going to arrange things differently than if you're balancing your environment for the car and for other things, for walking, for interacting, for creating places. And this is a trap we've been in for a long time. It's embedded in a lot of our dialogue where we say, well, that won't work here because this is the way we do things now. We want the new whatever, and the new whatever looks like this. Therefore, we'll put that in downtown because it works, but it works there. And it becomes very destructive when you start taking what works out there and putting it in here and clearing away and really destroying everything that makes it an urban place. Other things that are changing that we have to account for is the market. And we used to talk about this very crude, very broad market. This is my demographic. I love you, family. It's nice to see you. The mom and dad with 2 kids, and I have to add one because I have a third, a little girl. And this was the classic family unit. But today we have to talk more about markets. It's much more fine-grained. Actually, there always was mini markets, but the chunk of this demographic has shrunk to less than half of what it was. So my demographic is less than 15% of American households. And I would say there's probably 3 times that emphasis or 4 times that emphasis out there in the built environment, building places that fit my demographic, but it's missing a huge shift in what's happening with the people of our communities. More and more households are younger, singles, and couples, have very different lifestyle interests. Sometimes when we're sitting around a room and we have, might be 3 or 4 planners, a couple of developers, and we're talking about the market and what we like and what we don't like, and you look around and suddenly you realize we're all between 45 and 60, and we're all white males, and we all have kids, and we are not the market. And we have to realize that when we're sitting around talking to each other, we're like, I don't like that, and that's not for me. And it's like, guess what? You're not the market. The market is much more diverse. Same thing with the workplace. The workplace is not the great factory towns that we have here in this region and the region where I worked in economic development, and the nature of work itself, and this is Joe Courtwright's subject again, much more highly networked and social and not linked necessarily to one particular, certainly not linked to a particular company, and maybe not linked to a particular place, but does revolve around lifestyle interests very strongly, and understanding this whole phenomena and how these folks don't easily fit into the office campus model out on the fringe. And I thought this was a great quote from the executive at Google. They were noticing how within the Google headquarters they had all these kind of places to socialize, and sometimes you go in and it looks like nobody's doing any work, they're just kind of hanging out. And he said, hey, people spend a lot of time here, so we want to keep them happy. That's how you should be thinking about how you might plan a workplace. And certainly from a development perspective, from a real estate perspective, the option of urbanism, which Christopher Lineberger has written about, is a real viable option now. We used to wonder about it and think, well, would anybody really want to live above the store or in one of those walkable places? And he actually lays it out very nicely in this book as there's the suburban, drivable suburban model, and there is a walkable urban model. And again, not that one's bad and one's good and one's evil and one's wonderful, but they're completely different choices. Okay, so the first is the simple philosophy, the simple standpoint of we're creating a place, not a project. This seems really simple until you go for a tour and you look around. And if the pieces aren't adding up to something more than the little islands, they are not contributing. They are not helping to make a place. Next, shape a place from the start. If you're trying to create a foothold to do some of your own placemaking locally, you don't do it by putting a building here and a building there. You have to frame a street or a block, finish 2 sides of one block, 2 sides of a street, frame a small public space so people have some idea what kind of place you're creating. Shape a place from the start, whether it's a small public space or a street. And by the way, one side of a street is not 50% of a place. That's 0. You have no sense of place. When you say, oh, we'll phase it in, we'll do one side, and we'll come back in a decade or so, and we'll do the other side. But everybody, we've got a place in the meantime. No, that's 0 place, 2 sides, you've got 100% place. You have a sense of place. Create a center of gravity. Is there one really distinctive, well-known public space in your community that if you're there, you're in the center of the community. You're in the center of it all. You know where you are. Lots of things happen there, and it orients you to everything else going on in the community. And actually, in a urban setting, a walkable urban setting, the public gathering space itself can be an anchor, can be a magnet. People will come to a place, a well-defined place, for no other reason than it's a nice place to walk around. And then when they do get there, they might buy your coffee and your shoes and other things. but the quality of the place itself can act as an anchor. And so it's important to design those places to accommodate a whole variety of uses, especially the primary places. But it's not about a single space. You know, you don't just, well, we created the one great plaza or green, we're done. What makes for great neighborhoods and communities and downtowns is to have a whole network of public spaces. And we're not talking about the great parks, the regional parks with ball fields and everything. And to take an example from Europe, you know, that really fine-grained network of plazas and greens and courtyards, and some are very private and some are very public. And so you have a whole range of experiences within a very short walking distance. So you have this much richer quality of life and supporting public, private life, semi-public activity, all different things that can take place within a very short distance. And so contemporary planners have tried to replicate this idea. This is Celebration, but you have a very active waterfront downtown. 5 minutes away, there's a park right near a school. Up at the top of the street, here's another little square leading up to this river. And then just a few minutes away, a little green within a cluster of houses. Very different kinds of places within 5-10 minute walk of each other. You go there for different reasons at different times of day, but it supports all different types of activity and really enriches the possibilities. Okay, create walkable scale neighborhoods and blocks. What do we mean by walkable scale? Typical rule of thumb is taken to be how far would you walk to do something? And the rule of thumb often is used a 5-minute walk from the center to the edge of a neighborhood, or about 1,320 feet. But you can also apply it to the structure of blocks. And very often in downtowns, we find very long blocks or very large blocks, sometimes super blocks, many blocks put together, which are not walkable because in order to go somewhere, you have to go all the way around. So if you apply the 5-minute walk idea to the size of your blocks, you can come up with a range of like maybe 250 by 400 foot blocks. Anything that adds up to around 1,320 feet, you could imagine you can walk all the way around the block in 5 minutes. Now, in existing urban areas, you can't just cut through all of the blocks and do new development, but you can think through maybe a paseo system. We did this in Coral Gables, where in the middle of long blocks, you find one passageway that you can open up to allow people to walk through, cut the walking time in half. And then the importance of these areas behind the building leading to parking areas, that they have to be of a quality that people feel safe in, so that if people are coming to your main street, to your downtown, they feel comfortable parking in the parking garage, walking through those paseos, those alleyways, and coming on to the main street areas. Streets, you should have somebody do a whole lecture on streets. On street design, most communities completely fall down in this area, and there's a lot of work to be done. I like this photo because it kind of gives you a snapshot of what could make a great street, and this is not rocket science. Sidewalks that are deep enough for a range of activities, walking side by side, cafes. Street trees to have some canopy and help form this outdoor room. Cars, still plenty of room for cars to move by. On-street parking to slow the traffic down and give you some sense of safety here. And the fact that you've got buildings of a sufficient scale to make it feel kind of like an outdoor room. It's not very complicated, but it does come down to some basic dimensions and some basic elements that we'll touch on here. But if you want walkable streets, you're going to have to adopt walkable street standards. I mean, this is an area where we can't really get around saying, I'll just describe to you what kind of street I want and you go do it. I mean, when engineering is involved, when traffic planning is involved, you really do need to get very specific with your standards. And there's a whole range of different urban street types. It's not the local road, the collector, and the arterial system. There's only 3 street types in the whole world that you can use. No, within an urban realm, within a city, there's a whole range of different types of streets which come with a whole set of dimensions and arrangements that you can adopt. Lots of what we talk about and lots of what's going on with placemaking as I mentioned before, is the literal shaping of places, the framing of the space between buildings, whether it's a street or a public space. And here again, there's rules of thumb that architects and planners have used for centuries. I mean, literally going back to Renaissance times and before. And it's not that it's fixed. It's not that you could never have something that falls out of this range, which would be silly. But there's certainly if you make observations and in a book like the Great Streets books and compare the streets you like best, you're going to find that they fall within a certain range of the width of the street in relation to the height of the buildings. And that's what creates a sense that you have some enclosure, some definition of the space, and a similar rule can be applied to public spaces. Now, I wanted to leave you with maybe one concept, one of my own favorite rules of thumb for street design. And again, it's a rule of thumb. It's not like it's handed down from God or anything. But it's a way to look at, it's a prism to look at your own streets through. Well, they came up with this 50-50 rule. This is actually out of one of Alan Jacobs' books. Here's the street. You have about, I think this says it's about 24 feet of space with sidewalk and the street trees on each side, and then there's about 50 feet of travel lane, of throughway in the middle. Roughly 50% for vehicles, 50% for pedestrians. Then there's the streetscape itself, and there's a whole methodology to kind of looking at streetscapes and the elements of streetscapes. It's not just about the sidewalk. There's the space right up against the building, the frontage, and how that's treated with canopies or colonnades. The furnishing area here where you might have trees, the curb itself, the lane for cars, how wide that is, and so forth. So there's all these elements to the streetscape. Where do the benches go? How wide is the planting strip for the trees? How wide of a sidewalk? And a lot of that depends on what's going on there. Is it the restaurant row? Is it the main street? Or is it just a pleasant street leading down to some more residential area? And that will change. Parking is very important. Car isn't going anywhere, and will probably continue to change to new technology, new fuels and everything, in addition to creating walkable places and transit and other good things. But we're going to have to continue to accommodate it. And we have good examples like this. But parking is power in terms of supporting businesses, in terms of attracting companies to locate in your communities, and even people to live there, to have adequate parking for residencies. But too much of a good thing, you can have too much of a good thing. And cities all over the country, I mean, really decimated their downtowns in search of more parking. And so this is the result you end up when the main problem to create your great downtown is parking. If you define the problem as not enough parking, you're going to be led down this path. You've got a big parking garage. You've got a lot of big parking garages. I saw quite a few today. And parking garages aren't a bad thing. Like I said, you need plenty of parking to support things. But there's a whole range of ways, and there's lots of examples. The Placemaking book has lots of examples. This was an article from the Journal that went through a whole range from the most low-density setting to the highest density setting with different block structures, walkable block structures. Sometimes it's a completely enclosed structure. Sometimes it's a detached structure, so you don't need the ventilation system. Sometimes it's surface lots. But the parking is always, as much as possible, screened in order to maintain a walkable frontage, because it doesn't take much to kill someone's desire to walk down your street. As little as probably 50 foot of dead space, of blank walls, of parking garage, of surface lots is enough for somebody to stop and they see you coming up and say, all right, I'm not going to walk down there anymore. And they walk in a different direction. It doesn't matter if you have stores beyond that. That will turn them back. Not sure how many linear feet of parking garage frontage you have here, but nobody's going to say, hey, let's go for a stroll down past the great parking garage. So there's all different strategies. Here's the surface lots lined by buildings, and the cars are parked behind when you don't have a market that supports parking structures. Here's an example where you have both residential and commercial mixed in the same parking garage. The residential pulls in one gate, the commercial pulls in the other. And you go around the corner here, the garage is lined with residential units. And actually, these people pull right into their units inside the garage. They have their own private parking spaces. Everybody's happy. It's also a nice transition because this is a single-family neighborhood right across the street. So you don't have a bare parking garage looking at looking down on the single-family houses. And this was an example from my dean's work on Miami 21. Here you have a fantastic garage with unbelievable waterfront vistas. So the cars are very happy to sit here all day and just stare out at the ships coming and going. You can, in some cases, remedy the situation. Even with really big parking garages, you guys might have to take back some street space to have the depth to do anything like this in some cases. But the best time to think about it is ahead of time. Okay, a couple other ideas, placemaking ideas. I'm going to check my time. All right. Consistent with that, it's a place, not a project. We get the sense of something being a big project when it's one relentless facade, even if it's a facade with windows. These are both from Charleston. This is historic Charleston, obviously, where you have the changing rhythm along the street. And then this was actually a project that was successful and appreciated because it spurred some development in the downtown that doesn't have nearly as much variety. And even when, and this is part of, I would say, maybe an example of new urbanism, if you wanted to use that term, is that you can have very large footprints of buildings that are designed to be very flexible in terms of how the space can be configured. So if you have a large tenant to start with, that's great. You've got a big 20, 30,000 square foot tenant, but it's designed recognizing that 30,000 square foot tenant today might turn into 3 10,000 square foot tenants tomorrow. And that the exterior of the building does not have to, nor should it, just reflect all one thing that's in there. And that you can break up these long facades and have a more varied streetscape. And along the lines of that idea, you can also design buildings to adapt over time. So looking at older communities, that buildings can change their use very often over long periods of time. So, this is Stuart Brand's whole idea with this book, How Buildings Learn. But you can build this into a building if you think of it ahead of time. You say, you know what, these are apartments right now because the apartment market is good, and I know I can lease these. But I think in 5 years from now, since my main street is right around the corner, these are going to be good storefront spaces. And in fact, that's what happened here. You need the right heights to the ceilings. You need the right depth to accommodate the commercial uses. But you can think through this ahead of time and design with flexibility in mind. This is an old lesson from the old main streets. Invest in fronts. Put your money up front for the facades, the good look on the street, not in the backs where the parking and the utilities and the trash go. Very simple, but you wouldn't believe. And I mean, there are certainly might be some cases around here where the fronts and backs, we're not sure where the fronts are, the shoulders turn to the side, the backs turn to the front of somebody else. Buildings should have fronts and backs. The job of the front is to help shape the place, whether it's the street or the public space. The backs we don't care about as much, and they're just hiding the parking. Storefronts themselves and the streetscapes, there's basic elements to retail storefronts. They don't have to all look traditional. They can look very modern, but there's some basic language of retailing that should be incorporated if you're trying to create retail streets. And there are some basic ideas about lighting storefronts, urban storefronts, which serve a whole variety of purposes. And this whole variety of storefronts that are well lit, even when they're closed, serves a purpose, sells goods all night long, and then poor ones drive business away. And you wouldn't believe how many town center, Main Street projects do a lot of things right, and they get the dimensions of the street and the mixed uses and all of that, and then they do something like this that's just a killer, with kind of strip mall facades and not really reflecting what type of retailer's in there. Having an arcade that might be too deep, people might prefer to walk out here in the sunlight and not even notice what's in the storefront windows. Mixing uses, we always emphasize and promote the mixture of uses, and you can certainly mix vertically, but mixing horizontally, this isn't too far away, this is actually over in Easton Town Center. Mixing horizontally is not a bad thing. Not every building has to be a vertical stack of mixed uses. Traditional cities, great cities, neighborhoods in places like San Francisco have single uses of retail shops, and you go around the corner and there's single uses of residential, and that's okay. But they're right next to each other. You know, they're cheek to jowl, and they form a consistent street front, a consistent walkable urban pattern that you can connect to. This is what a lot of our government institutions have been reduced to. This is Maple Grove Government Center in Texas. This is where you go to get a marriage license, get a dog tag, and other civic activities. And so many of our communities, the civic buildings, especially out on the fringe, get the leftover land or the land the developer traded for the other land, saying, hey, I've got a spot for you for the new city hall out here and the new police station, and everything kind of gets flung around in the deal making. But traditionally, civic buildings not only certainly deserve, and they deserve a dignified spot, but they also help dignify the place itself, but they also bring people in and out of these places, whether it's a downtown or a smaller commercial area, neighborhood area, civic area. And this is back on that South Square Courthouse Square. And the city, when it saw what the developer was doing, and they kind of got the idea, it's like, oh, okay, you know, now we understand what you're doing with this town center thing, and the mixed use and the public space and all that. We do want to put our city hall there, and we want to put it right in the middle of the courthouse square, which is actually a traditional place to put a courthouse square in a lot of these settings. And then they got halfway through, the developer agreed to it. The developer would have preferred that they put it closer to the road and completely enclose the square, but they said, okay. And kind of a throwback to the suburban, the caveat on the suburban side was they wanted people to see it from the roadway as they're driving by. They could see all the way into the city hall. But then when they got into the construction of it, remember the fronts and backs rule? Put your money in the front, not in the back. What's the problem with this building? It's got no back. It's got no back. It's right in the middle of your courthouse square. So they actually had to put it up to a vote to the citizens to tax themselves another couple $1 million to finish the facade all the way around, which they did. And people were happy to. This is getting into the institutions and the importance of institutions. Used to be, you know, during the 100 years ago and less than 100 years ago, the big boosters in our communities were the industries, business and industry. Business and industry is much more footloose, extremely footloose now, and can locate major operations and entire facilities and their company in many different places, including other countries. And our civic institutions are increasingly important in this whole work of creating and sustaining our communities, and they're really important here. You have great institutions putting a lot of investment into the community, and that's great, and they're not going anywhere. So part of the evolution now has to be to help them help you create a great community, great places. And a lot of times this is not the fault of, it's certainly not the fault of the institution, focusing on what the demands are for the facilities and kind of the internal workings of buildings. But institutions like in the medical industry and hospitals have not traditionally been great neighbors. And I'm not pointing out any institution here because this is the same everywhere. Their focus has not been on placemaking and blending into the community. It's been, I need some land to expand, here it is, and now I've expanded. And so this is a major challenge. I mean, the healthcare industry and biotech and everything else, these are expanding industries. They have not been traditional players in community building and placemaking. They need to be on board. They need to be really brought to the table and also see how blending in and building into the community. We did a big workshop in Memphis where they have huge expansion of biotech and medical, and St. Jude's is here and all these other hospitals to figure out there's also benefits to them doing this. There's places for their workers to live that are nearby. They don't have to provide all of the places for people to eat in the hospital. There's a whole dynamic that the community and livable neighborhood reinforces the needs that the hospital and the medical facilities have for a workforce, for a happy workforce, and for a healthy community. Okay, a few more of these. Create rooms with a view. Once you've shaped these places and you've created a public realm, this is what the urban place has that the suburban place typically does not have. The difference between a big suburban development where the amenity might be a golf course or a pool and tennis courts and things like that, you're not going to compete on that level in an urban setting. What the urban setting has that the suburban setting doesn't is a great public realm, an urban, walkable public realm. So you do everything to create that. That's your amenity. And you're not trying to compete on, I have the most spacious parking lot anywhere in the metro area. That's not where you compete. You compete on this level. And when you do that, creating rooms with a view is a nice way of saying you've created an amenity that enhances the value of everything on the street. It enhances the value to the people living there. They can do things, they can walk around. It increases the value of the unit itself because it has this added attraction to it. You can do the same with retail, extending the brand out into the street. That's good for the retailer, but it's also good for shaping places in the community. And then you can do it with even things like hotels. And this is one of my favorite examples from Reston Town Center, where in the Hyatt, they have what they call a marketing suite. And the marketing suite, they have major Fortune 500 companies. There's a lot of office in Reston Town Center. And when they're trying to recruit a company, they put them in the marketing suite. Nobody meets with them. They just go in, go and sit. The light's on, shades are open, and they let them soak it in before they have their meeting where they try to talk to them about, wouldn't you like to come to Reston Town Center and bring your company? And they look out and they see the main street, and they see the shops and the restaurants, places where they could have business meetings. Now there's housing there as well, places where they might even like to live. In Fountain Square, there's the great pavilion where there's concerts in the summer and there's skating in the winter. So the place is selling itself as these guys are just sitting in the hotel room looking down on the whole amenity package that this walkable mixed-use environment offers. So the room with a view has many different angles to that. And then the whole range of dining. So this is one area that's off the charts in terms of the growth over the last few decades. We love to go out and eat. Everybody hates to cook. And all different times of day. This is something to think about, though, in terms of it's not just one type of dining activity, eating and drinking establishment. There's a whole range. And how you arrange those and how you might recruit breakfast, lunch, dinner places, fine dining versus quick lunches and things like that. There's a whole strategy that can go with this in terms of creating your downtown environment. And this actually set off a whole chain of events in Coral Gables when I showed this shot, which is not a palm tree place with lots of warm weather all the time. This is over in Paris. That with very simple, inexpensive structures and some nice drapes and things, you can create you can help frame the streetscape and create a whole really attractive environment in your downtowns. And then I think this is the last one in this sequence. With placemaking and walkable communities, the closer you get, the better you should look. And these are examples. These are both from Country Club Plaza. The details, the nuances, and this is the area for real expression in the community about its identity, and to have artists work on things and to come up with decorative ideas and landscaping elements and other things. It's not like a suburban realm where you're just in and out or you're driving by at 40, 50 miles an hour. People are walking, and the details really do matter. And the delicate nature of what type of lighting, what textures, what plants, the container plants, what they planted, all of that. And I didn't realize when I first visited this, you look through these bars, and that's a parking garage. So you can actually hold the street with a somewhat blank wall if you do it right. All right, now let's talk about the process of making this happen, community building. And this is a very simple sequence, 4 steps that I'm going to emphasize. One, and this is the starting place, this has to be the starting place, is to develop a vision. It has to be a shared vision that people agree on and people buy into. You can explain it in simple words, or you can point to a picture. And sometimes it's very hard to imagine what this place could be without the help of some architects or people who can draw. You have to be able to envision it, what you want as a community or a neighborhood. Once you have a vision that's agreed upon, then you can develop a plan. And then once you have a plan, then you can get into the details of a code. And then finally is when you can implement the ideas and start transforming places. Now, and rebuilding places, not just tearing everything down. So this is a sequence. And I'd say where a lot of communities run into problems is that they skip around or they jump in at different points of the process. One of the most common is the code. I don't like those building heights. They shouldn't be 50 feet, they should be 30 feet. I think that density is too high. 15 sounds like a lot. Shouldn't it be more like 7? And they start talking about numbers and arguing over elements of a code document, a regulation, with no vision to start with. It's like, well, what are we trying to create in the first place? We have to know what the vision is before we can ever talk about this stuff. And then implementation, this is where the developer just shows up with the plan for the lot on the corner and says, here's what we're going to do. Let's vote. And you can't begin with implementation without any vision. That's where conflicts arise as well. Although more often than not it might be successful, that's not the way it should work. So your regulations, if they are this ad hoc collection of things without any vision, are going to continue to create ad hoc places. If your regulations are based on a vision, based on the types of places you're trying to create, and hopefully graphically illustrated so that everybody, picture tells 1,000 words, I can see what it's supposed to be like, then maybe you can start to get at creating better places. All right, the last piece of this talk, I want to return to this notion of a culture of good placemaking, because I think this is where this is where we get stuck. 100 years ago, we had less professionalization in the community building professions. So architecture was relatively new, planning was brand new. People who were planners were trained in architecture or landscape architecture. There was a lot of dialogue between the design professions and then other emerging professions, city managers and others. It was a more fluid conversation about the act of planning and building and designing streets and cities. And we've gotten much more specialized over time. A famous quote from my favorite NASCAR guru. So we can some visions and plans do not get realized. Why not? Where do we fall down? And in some cases, it's, we're going out of sequence. In other cases, is that we're too rigid in our silos of, I'm solving the parking problem, you're solving the on-campus residential problem, you're addressing the downtown retailer problem, and we all go off and do our thing, and at the end of the day, none of it works together. There is not a kind of a shared dialogue between the professions and between the stakeholders about how do we get there together. And you can't regulate that. You can have guidelines, you can have your vision and your plan and so forth. But when it comes down to implementation, you have to be able to have a dialogue about what works in a particular place, in a particular situation, because it changes a lot. Here's an example of where the vision and the plan were realized, the before and after in Naples, Fifth Avenue. And good things can come of this, property values raise. That's the big vision. When you have a big plan, sometimes you need to cut it down to how do we begin to affect change here? Growth is slow, the market's down, people don't really understand what this big plan is or anything. So sometimes you need to take just a little step and have what you might call a demonstration project. So this is in South Miami where they actually did this. They said, let's take one block, use some public money, some private money. We'll create the vision of what this plan is about. Very simple idea, very incremental, two sides of a street, one block. I got it. I got the sense of place and what you guys are trying to do with the plan. South Miami, over the 10 years I've been there, has really blossomed. The people took this and ran with it. And so the proposals coming into the planning office and coming in before the commission suddenly became more consistent with the vision because they had a demonstration project. And then all kinds of public-private partnerships. There's lots of cooperative relationships that can be worked out. It's not deal-making. It's trying to come up with ways to work together to realize the vision, implement the plan, do good things for me if I'm trying to profit, for you if you're trying to create some affordable housing and help frame the street. But it's not, I wouldn't simplify it as the deal, making a deal. And when we get it right, we can evolve places over time. Here's two examples I'll give you. An old shopping center. This is a suburban retrofit that was around for 17 years, created into a mixed-use town center. Been around for, check my math, 25 years and still going. And here's the Boca Raton Mall you've seen in an earlier slide. This lasted 14 years, an enclosed mall. Now here's the argument, hey, people don't want that walkable stuff and outside stuff and everything. Here's the complete opposite of that. All climate enclosed, oh, it's hot outside, and you go inside and be cool, and plenty of parking. This is what everybody wants. And it only lasted 14 years. And there's lots of dead retail properties out there. This place has been around 20 years this year. And both of these cases have outlived the properties there before, and this isn't going anywhere. So here's the trade-up example, where you probably had about 250, 300,000 square feet in the mall, retail. Well, you still have that. You've got a cinema. You've got even more office space, because you've gone vertical. You've got apartments. You've got townhomes. Public involvement in this project. Tax increment financing money, all of that good stuff. Public parking. Freed up space for parks. Got a 12-acre park, really does serve as the focal point for this community, a 2,000-seat open-air theater, space for a museum of art. So you gain all of this in return. And by the way, the community still owns the land because they did a long-term ground lease. And once again, it was a catalyst for development in this downtown. So the value of the property and the value of this downtown submarket as that property established a place. It created a place where there hadn't been one before and set off sympathetic development around it and creates a great place for the community to gather and for all kinds of things to happen. This is the same place. This was a wedding I stumbled on in Meisner Park in this project, and I guarantee you there were no weddings at the Boca Raton Mall. It takes leadership, certainly, to make this happen, to do this community building and placemaking stuff. It's not easy, but it also takes leadership that empowers other people to do things differently, to maybe not follow the exact regulations in the book, and to bend the rules, and to think, to consider doing things new, and to have a group that maybe acts as the stewards of the vision and of the plan for the community, that come from all different backgrounds, maybe come from all different departments in a city. But if you have the vision, then this group, any group of citizens, can continue to keep that vision alive and move it forward. Sometimes it's the approvals process itself. We got to re-examine that, try to streamline it. It's too complicated. And then other times you can actually institutionalize this community design function. And Joe Riley did this in his city, where he has an urban design director, and they do community design work for different sites, different parts of the city over time, engaging the public, working with the stakeholders on a daily basis. So we're at the end, and I'll share, this is my last slide, and I'll give you an example of what I mean by a culture of good placemaking. This is St. Philip's Episcopal Church. Anybody been here? You know this place? Yeah. Very famous, kind of really beautiful view. Any dummy can take a great photograph. A guy took this photograph because it's such a kind of picturesque view. This is back in the 1830s, 1840s. This church was expanded, fires, rebuilt several times. And this time, it was in vogue. All the churches in England were doing it, so they had to do it in Charleston too. Step the steeple out into the street. Really make a strong statement, be very prominent. It terminates the vista, creates this very dramatic place. The city said, well, I guess you could do that, but then we're going to have to widen the street because they're going to have this church in the way of the wagons going down the street. And so they had a dialogue, and the folks at the church said, well, instead of widening the street, we'll set the church back a little bit, and only the steeple will come out. And then it doesn't cut off the street actually swings around the front of the church. And by the way, we think it'd be a much better use of the money, instead of widening the street, to put it in the steeple. And so they agreed to that. No code required placemaking. One of my favorite examples, and if we could kind of maybe revive some of that dialogue within our own communities, maybe get away from our separate silos and specialties and rule books and zoning and guidelines and traffic engineering standards and development practices, and this works there and that doesn't work here. And if we can sit down and say, wouldn't this be a really cool street, or wouldn't this be a really great place if we did this? And what do we have to do to make it happen? Instead of, here are all the reasons why it can't happen. That would be a culture of good placemaking. Thank you very much.